Dear FromSoftware, I think we need to talk. You have made some of my favorite video games of all time. I cannot express how much I love Dark Souls and what that game means to me personally. I truly believe that if it hadn't been for Dark Souls or Demon Souls, I wouldn't be sitting here recording this video because I probably wouldn't be playing video games at all anymore. Those games reignited my passion for this hobby, and I just couldn't wait to see where the journey would go for the studio that developed them. And what a journey it was. Bloodborne, Sekiro, and even the base game of Elden Ring, they all brought something new and exciting to the table while still retaining those core design philosophies that drove the development of the previous games. But there was something off. Every time I played a new FromSoft game, I felt that the main draw of the latest game was to challenge players in new ways. To present them the latest batch of presumably unbeatable bosses that would require them to forget everything they had learned so far and adopt new strategies to succeed. I think that realization hit me for the first time when I played Dark Souls 3. Bosses were brutal in that game. At least, I felt that way at the time. They would spin around for ages, spamming attacks, giving the player very small windows to counterattack. Bosses would delay their attacks in weird and unnatural ways and just mess with the player's sense of timing. I remember distinctly fighting the Nameless King and hating every second of it. To me, this way of designing challenging combat encounters felt super weak and just straight up lame. Surprisingly to me, that was not the general consensus at the time. I looked up discussions online and found that people loved Dark Souls 3. Nameless King was even praised as one of FromSoftware's best bosses ever. People not only loved the new bosses, but also the additions made to the lore introduced in Dark Souls 1. And to me, it just felt like out of place and tacked on. I realized something that year. I was in the minority. A couple years later, Sekiro was released, and even though it had many of the same problems that I had with Dark Souls 3, Sekiro was different enough that I just had a great time with that game. It was hard and unforgiving, but it was also not a Souls game. It was an action title, focused on timing your deflects and attacks, and it was a welcome breeze of fresh air. And then came Elden Ring. A return to form, a true continuation of the Souls formula in a new open world dress. For the most part, I think that combination worked really well. The lands between were a joy to explore. How the areas were connected, how there was always something interesting and cool to find in every corner of the world, how boss fights would just start out of nowhere in the middle of the open world. Elden Ring had some really cool ideas. And it also had some of the deepest lore FromSoft had ever put in a game. The way Miyazaki combined Eastern philosophy and Western mythology with allusions to real-world events, it was just marvelous. Add to that some War of the Roses family drama that George R. R. Martin brought to the table, and you end up with something truly magnificent. The world of Elden Ring was intriguing. Its characters interesting and multifaceted. The game left many questions unanswered, and I longed for more. This is where the DLC came in. On that front, I have to admit that Shadow of the Erdtree mostly delivered. Many mysteries of the main game were addressed here. Without spoiling anything, I was delighted to learn more about Marika, Mikola, Saint Trina, the Fingers, and the origins of the Golden Order. However, I cannot help but feel a little let down after finishing the DLC and exploring pretty much every nook and cranny of the Shadowlands. I really hope to learn more about the Glowmite Queen, Godwyn, and just other narrative aspects of the main game that were kept rather vague until now. Maybe that's just me, and I realized that FromSoft could only focus on so many things, but I do feel a little disappointed on the lore front. So how about the gameplay then? Well, as it is often the case, it's complicated. On a fundamental level, gameplay hasn't changed much from the main game. You still dodge, attack, block, and parry your way through the lands. There are still a million ways to play, and for the most part, they are all viable. But there are some significant changes that only apply to the Shadowlands. You've probably heard or read about it somewhere already, but Shadow of the Erdtree introduces a whole new balancing system based on certain key items that are scattered around the world. These Skadoo tree fragments, or Shadow tree fragments, increase your damage done and decrease your damage taken. Simple as that. Now, I get why this is in the game. Balancing the difficulty in a way that provides a fair challenge for everyone is probably an impossible task, considering that players come in a huge variety of builds, some overleveled, some underleveled, before starting the DLC. This is a simple way to even the playing field for everyone, regardless of level, equipment, or skills. It also feels super cheap in a way. I felt like the entire DLC was about these damn fragments. Exploration was only a means to get more fragments, and I actually felt disappointed when, after uncovering a secret area or a hidden chest, there wouldn't be a precious fragment as a reward. It's important to note that there is a set amount of these in the game. You cannot farm them or anything, you have to go out and explore to find them. This felt really restrictive to me. In the base game, whenever I faced a challenge that was a bit too hard for me, I would go somewhere else to farm runes and just level up. In Shadow of the Erdtree, that didn't work anymore, because levels are next to meaningless. You have to get those fragments to make a significant change, and to me, that just felt like it took away my freedom in how I wanted to explore the world. Thankfully, exploration in general was still as fun as it ever was in Elden Ring. I would even say that the Shadowlands are far more interesting in terms of exploration than the lands between them. The first time I explored the Graveside Plain, I just couldn't believe my eyes. I took out my telescope and looked down below into the next area. But there wasn't just one area, there were layers and layers of different areas on top of each other. At first, I thought some of them were just scenery, but soon I discovered no. There were actually paths to walk and items to pick up. You could actually go there. This excited me immensely. Having now spent more than 30 hours in the Shadowlands, I can confirm that the way this game handles vertical exploration was fun as hell. There were so many hidden paths and connections between areas, it was truly a bliss. On top of that, the game is just gorgeous. These are by far the most beautiful areas FromSoftware has ever created. The vistas are breathtaking, the colors and lighting create this very unique, melancholic vibe that is really quite distinct from the lands between. In general, the Shadowlands are beautiful, and exploration was in itself rewarding, even though there were some rather empty stretches of land here and there, especially towards the end of the DLC. Okay, so if exploration was fun, the lore was interesting, at least for the most part, and gameplay was mostly unchanged from the main game, which I enjoyed, why do I still walk away from this DLC being disappointed? Well folks, it all comes down to the boss fights, and let me tell you, I think each and every single boss fight in this DLC sucks. Like really sucks. All of them. Every single one. Remember what I said about Dark Souls 3 and how I just didn't understand how anyone could think this game had decent bosses? It's the same thing here, just multiplied by 1,000. I keep wondering who decided that these games were about challenging bosses. Is this the only thing that people care about? Hitting your head against the wall for hours until you finally break it and feel like a champ for a short while? I feel like Shadow of the Erdtree encapsulates everything I hate about modern FromSoftware's boss design. A typical boss in the DLC does the following things constantly. spinning around in circles while spamming attacks, unnaturally delaying an attack by holding the weapon in an awkward position simply to mess with the player's timings, and then catch them while rolling, hitting so hard that 1 or 2 hits kill you, rinse and repeat. Mind you, the last point holds true regardless of whether or not you have upgraded your Erdtree blessings. Even with all blessings maxed out, best armor and a high level of vigor, boss attacks will deal insane amounts of damage. So, what do you do to overcome these tremendous challenges? Well, you have to learn every single attack. You have to recognize patterns and react accordingly. In some cases, you have to drop the way you play completely and adopt a new, different playstyle. That is something I had to do for the last boss. I simply do not understand how people draw pleasure from this. Seriously. To me, this just feels like learning for a test in school. But I did it. I played by the rules. In each boss fight, I would learn every action that the boss did. I would learn how to react accordingly, like the good boy I was. I would then apply my knowledge and eventually overcome the challenge and beat the boss. And you know what I would feel? Absolutely nothing. After finishing the DLC, I would go on YouTube and Twitch and just see people react to defeating a hard boss. They would scream and go crazy, and I totally get that, but I also don't get it. Every time I defeated a boss, I was just glad it was over. I didn't feel accomplished or particularly great about myself. I would just sit there and go to the next area. I didn't feel like any real skill was involved. It was just learning and applying knowledge. And the thing is, it hasn't always been like this in previous FromSoft titles. Every time I faced a boss in Demon Souls or Dark Souls, I felt like the scales were balanced and a fair fight would ensue. It was absolutely possible to beat a boss first try by dynamically adjusting to the action. Attacks were telegraphed in a way that would make them actually readable. Making mistakes was okay. You didn't have to memorize every single attack to prevail. To me, these fights were much more versatile and fun than anything I have faced in this DLC. Then there's the multitude of technical issues that make boss fights even feel more unfair, to an extent. Demon Souls is 15 years old at this point, and we are still dealing with this shitty camera behavior when moving against the wall, or trying to target an enemy while the game thinks you want to target that random guy 20 miles away and not the big dragon head that's literally in your face right now. Then there's so much visual clutter in many of the fights. I was just overstimulated at times. Lightning strikes, fire, lightning strikes engulfed by fire, whirlwind attacks, magical laser beams, blood effects, madness effects, holy attacks. Half the time I couldn't even follow what was going on screen. To make things worse, I experienced constant stutters, frame drops, crashes, and bugs. And that on my somewhat beefy gaming PC. I'm okay with some technical difficulties so close to a game's launch, but it's hard to accept that a game released in 2024 still deals with many of the same technical issues as its predecessor from 2009. So, would I recommend getting this DLC? I would say that if you're a fan of the main game, you probably haven't even clicked on this video. You don't need this video as you've already paid $40 to play this DLC day one. I don't blame you, I did the exact same thing. If you enjoy modern FromSoft games and you had a good time with Elden Ring and you're looking for that extra challenge, well, you'll find it here. If you hope that all mysteries of the lore will be uncovered, you'll probably be disappointed. But if you're looking for more intricate writing to enrich the world of Elden Ring, you'll find it here too. If you hoped that the DLC would offer anything fundamentally new in comparison to the main game, well, I commend your naivete, for we are both fools. For me, this is goodbye for now. FromSoft, we had a good time, you and I. Maybe we can still be friends. And who knows what the future might hold. But if this DLC is indicative for where you are going, I fear I cannot follow you any longer. You'll always have a special place in my heart, but for now, I fear it's goodbye. Farewell, Umbassa, and Warrior Nox.